What if I told you one of the most repeated lines in fitness is also one of the most misunderstood? You can't build muscle in a calorie deficit. People say it like it's a law of physics, like gravity, like taxes, but the research actually doesn't support that as a universal rule. In fact, multiple studies have shown that people can lose fat and gain lean mass at the same time under the right conditions, particularly when resistance training and protein intake are structured correctly. For example, in 2016, researcher Stuart Phillips and colleagues published a study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition where trained men were put into a calorie deficit while doing resistance training. The higher protein group actually lost more fat and gained lean mass at the same time, showing that muscle gain during a deficit can occur when training and nutrition are aligned. So the real answer isn't yes or no, it depends on how you do it. But most people are missing the details that matter. Today we're tackling one of the most debated questions in fitness. Can you build muscle in a calorie deficit? Because the old school answer was simple. Bulk to build muscle, cut to lose fat, never try to do both. And to be fair, that advice didn't come out of nowhere. Research consistently shows that muscle growth tends to occur more easily when energy availability is higher. Reviews on hypertrophy and sports nutrition have pointed out that when calories are extremely low, recovery and training performance suffer, which can limit muscle growth. But easier is not the same thing as only possible in a surplus. That's where the conversation usually gets oversimplified. Modern research shows that body recomposition, losing fat while gaining muscle, can happen, particularly in beginners, people returning to training, and individuals with higher body fat levels. So if you've ever felt confused by the mixed messaging on this topic, that's understandable, because the answer is more nuanced than the internet usually makes it sound. So let's get into it. Here's where people get stuck. They want to lose fat, so they cut calories. Then someone tells them, careful, you'll lose muscle. Someone else says, just lift weights and eat protein. And then another person says recomposition only happens for beginners. Meanwhile, someone else claims they did it, and now everyone is confused. Part of the issue is that people assume a calorie deficit is only about eating less, which I covered in my video on how to stay in a calorie deficit. But energy balance is actually influenced by several factors. You can create a deficit by reducing calorie intake, increasing exercise, increasing daily movement, which researchers call NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or some combination of all those. In fact, Dr. James Levine's research at the Mayo Clinic found that NEAT alone can vary by hundreds of calories per day between individuals, meaning how much you move throughout the day can significantly influence energy balance. So when we say calorie deficit, we're talking about the entire energy equation, not just how little someone eats. So let's break down the science. Fat loss occurs when the body is in negative energy balance, meaning it's using more energy than it's consuming. Pretty simple. This concept has been demonstrated repeatedly in metabolic research. For example, studies on energy balance published in journals like the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition show that when energy expenditure exceeds intake, the body begins mobilizing stored energy, primarily body fat. But muscle growth is controlled by a different system. Muscle grows when muscle protein synthesis exceeds muscle protein breakdown. This process is triggered primarily by resistance training and supported by dietary protein. Exercise scientist Brad Schoenfeld explained in a 2010 review in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research that mechanical tension from resistance training is one of the primary drivers of muscle hypertrophy, meaning muscle growth. In other words, fat loss is driven primarily by energy balance. Muscle growth is driven primarily by training stimulus and protein availability. These systems interact, but they are not identical. They don't work the same. That's exactly why recomposition can occur. If the body has stored energy, meaning body fat, and you provide a strong enough stimulus through training, plus enough protein for repair and growth, the body can use stored fat to support the energy demands of building or maintaining muscle. And We have direct research showing this. In a Longland 2016 study, participants were placed into a 40% calorie deficit for 4 weeks while doing intense resistance and interval training. One group consumed 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. The other consumed 2.4 grams per kilogram. The high protein group not only lost more fat, they also gained lean mass, even while dieting. That's a powerful example of how training and protein intake can influence body composition during a deficit. So let's go into the factors that matter if you want to build muscle in a calorie deficit. Factor 1. Training stimulus. Muscle doesn't grow just because you eat protein. It grows because your body is forced to adapt. Resistance training provides that stimulus. As I mentioned earlier, Brad Schoenfield's research on hypertrophy explains that mechanical tension from resistance training is one of the main triggers of muscle growth. So if someone is in a deficit but continues lifting with progressive overload, increasing load, reps, or volume over time, the body still receives a signal to maintain or build muscle. But if training intensity drops dramatically during a diet, that signal disappears, which is why replacing lifting with endless cardio during a diet is one of the fastest ways to lose muscle and slow your metabolism down. Factor 2, protein intake. Protein becomes even more important during a calorie deficit because your body is trying to lose fat while preserving muscle tissue. They're not the same tissue. A large meta-analysis by Morton and colleagues published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2018 analyzed dozens of resistance training studies and found that daily protein intake of about 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight maximized muscle growth for most people. During a deficit, many experts recommend going slightly higher, often around 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram to help preserve lean mass. And again, we see this in controlled research. The Longland study I mentioned earlier showed significantly better lean mass outcomes with 2.4 grams per kilogram of protein per day compared to lower protein intakes. Same training program, same calorie deficit, different protein intake, different results. Factor 3, training status. Training experience also matters. Beginners often see body recomposition more easily because almost any proper training stimulus is new. Their bodies respond rapidly. People returning to training can also regain muscle faster due to something researchers call muscle memory. Studies in Frontiers in Physiology have shown that previously trained muscles retain cellular adaptations that allow faster regrowth after periods of inactivity. Good news for when you take time off or you have an injury. Now, for those of us who have been lifting seriously for years, and by seriously, I don't mean casually doing the same light dumbbell routine and calling it strength training. I mean years of progressive overload, getting stronger, building muscle, pushing intensity, refining technique, and accumulating real training volume. For experienced lifters, progress slows down a lot because as you approach your genetic potential, the rate of muscle gain decreases. Reviews on hypertrophy research consistently show that beginners can gain muscle rapidly, while advanced lifters experience much slower improvements and require more precise training and nutrition to continue progressing, which is why beginners sometimes make veterans jealous. Beginners can gain visible muscle in months. Veterans might train incredibly hard for 6 months just to add a small amount of muscle. That's not failure, that's physiology. Factor 4, deficit size. Another major factor is the size of the deficit. Aggressive dieting increases the risk of muscle loss. Moderate deficits are generally better for preserving lean mass. In 2014, researcher Eric Helms published recommendations in the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition suggesting that athletes aiming to preserve muscle during fat loss should aim to lose around 0.5 to 1% of body weight per week. Similarly, a study by Garth and colleagues in the International Journal of Sport Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism found that athletes who lost weight more slowly preserved more lean mass and strength compared to those dieting aggressively. So the deficit size matters. Crash dieting makes recomposition much harder. So here's the truth. Yes, you can build muscle in a calorie deficit, but not because you're breaking the laws of thermodynamics and not because you just believe hard enough. It happens when the right variables align consistently. Heavy resistance training, adequate protein intake, a moderate calorie deficit, good recovery and sleep, and consistency and progression over time. Body recomposition works best for beginners, people returning after time off, or people with higher body fat levels. For advanced lifters, it is still possible, but slower and harder. So let's recap. A calorie deficit is necessary for fat loss, 1000%. But a calorie deficit does not automatically prevent muscle growth. Muscle gain depends on training stimulus, protein intake, recovery, and how aggressive the deficit is. When those factors are aligned, research shows that people can lose fat while maintaining, sometimes even gaining, lean mass. Body recomposition isn't magic or accidental or random. It's just physiology working in your favor when training and nutrition are done intelligently, not shots in the dark. I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced body recomposition, losing fat while gaining muscle, while getting stronger? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy science-backed content that actually explains why things work, subscribe and watch my next video on how to actually stay in a calorie deficit long enough to build muscle and lose fat, and all the variables that go into a calorie deficit, not just eating less. Because knowing the science is one thing, actually living it and applying it, that is where the real challenge begins. I'll see you in the next one.